Welcome to Conversations in a Vintage Shop, a podcast from behind my counter between customers. Join me while I sit behind my retail counter and just have a conversation with you, or with myself. While I look out the window, observe what I see, things that are happening in the store today, throughout the week, and just fun little stories that I have from my time as a business owner. This is something that you find interesting, and keep listening. And I appreciate you. Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining me back here for episode 6, season 2 of Conversations in a Vintage Shop, a podcast where I just talk to you in my vintage shop during business hours about anything that's happening in the day or conversations I have recently had with customers or friends visiting the shop. And you might hear, I'm not sure, I do have loud shop music playing in the background, and I could walk to the back of the store and turn it down, but I really don't feel like it. So if you hear that background noise and you haven't listened to the podcast before, that is what it is. Now everybody really likes the idea of me doing this reoccurring segment where I update everybody on the drama that is happening in my building, the building that my shop is located in. It's an ongoing saga. It's almost a soap opera. And it's one of those things where you feel like you just have to talk about it because sometimes issues that come up are so ridiculous that if you don't tell someone, you're going to explode. And this is a conversation I've had with people who live and work in my building about a new business that had moved into our building over the summer. And if you haven't listened to the entire podcast episodes, you may not quite know everything that's happening. So to give a very brief rundown, it's a new business that had moved into our building. They label themselves as an elevated experience. So their, ideal customer base is definitely one with deep pockets from everything we've been hearing. But they've, butted heads and rubbed a lot of people in our building the wrong way, whether it be wanting to enact some kind of dress code, yelling, drinking, threatening to get people fired. I mean, there's a huge list. I really could do a whole dedicated episode on the history of everything that's been happening in this building since last July, but I don't know, maybe I will. If you guys want that, maybe I'll take a vote. But I have more updates. And I'm happy to say I don't have any dealings with said person. I hear all of this from other people who have had unfortunate run-ins with her. But it seems her rampage of jerk behavior just keeps going. And I don't know if I mentioned this in one of the other episodes, but when they first started doing construction and moving into this building and retrofitting the space, our maintenance guy who takes care of our building, he makes sure everything is working the way it needs to, was trying to raise a red flag on certain practices he was seeing going on in this space while it was under construction. Things that are not up to code, are not good for a building, especially a historic building. And when he tried to do inspections on this space, he was told that they would send him basically, I don't know if it's some kind of cease and desist order or something, but legally they would send him a notice barring him from that space, even though it's in the building that he does maintenance on. It doesn't make any sense. So basically he was told, don't you dare come in this space, which he took the memo. He didn't. But I guess now the space is having plumbing problems, sewage backup, all that fun stuff that happens in an old building. And now they want to know why he doesn't come in and help them. and perform this maintenance, even though they had told him if he'd stepped foot in there, they were going to go after him legally. So that's just, the tip of the iceberg of some of the drama that's been happening lately. And they have been having parties. They're an event space. And I guess the woman who manages it is upset about the parking situation, which in this building, we have one parking lot for 3 apartment buildings and all of the businesses that are in those buildings. And there aren't that many spots. It's first come, first served. So the rest of us, if we don't get a spot, we have to park on the street, get dropped off. I mean, we do what everybody does in a downtown area. You just have to make it work and find a spot. It's nothing new. But this woman got mad because when she would have her parties, her clients wouldn't have anywhere to park. So she had said she wanted the businesses and tenants to park on the street or park a couple blocks away at a paid lot so her customers can park here for their 2-3 hour drinking event. I mean, let's just think about that. You live here, but I don't want you to park here. But the funniest thing is, she parks 3 of her cars in front of this building every day. So it's okay for her to do it, but not for any of us. So notice this theme here. There's a theme. Now on top of that, she is just not a very good person from what I'm hearing. And many times people in the building will say they can hear her yelling at maintenance workers, or if there's plumbing issues, they'll hear her yelling and cussing at them, even when all their doors are shut. How professional is that, I ask, for an elevated experience? Is that what an elevated experience means, is you get yelled at, cussed at, demeaned? I don't know. I guess I'm not rich enough to know. But the thing that I thought was the funniest that I've heard recently. So when they took over downstairs, we have 2 communal bathrooms in this building that mainly are used with all the businesses that are in our building. And you have a lot of businesses, and their customers, clients can use these bathrooms as well, but we all have keys. And when they redid the spot in the lower level of our building, there is a bathroom that is butted right up next to them. But it is one of our communal bathrooms. And so they decided they didn't like how it looked, so they changed the door stalls in the bathroom. They hung up some pictures, tried to decorate it a bit, but it's still a communal building bathroom. Well, this one was under the belief that this bathroom was hers. It was this event space's bathroom, and nobody else could use it. So she wanted to add little touches to the bathroom for her customers. So she added a bunch of free tampons that her customers could grab, use, which is great. I think more bathrooms should have free sanitary products. I'm all for it. But apparently, it depends on who's taking those products. And in a huff, she had taken all the tampons out of the bathroom because she was angry that other people were taking them. Because it's her bathroom. And nobody else should be using it and taking her tampons. They're just for her paying clients. And so now that's the new debate in the building on whose bathroom really is it? And who took her tampons? I really wish 2 years into this pandemic that my biggest problem in life was a tampon thief. If only life were that simple, right? I mean, I could go on and on and on about this, but I thought, giving little updates, because I've had so many people come in and ask about it, and I realized previous to the last episode, I didn't really ever give many updates on it since. And now that construction is done, I haven't really had a need to, but more and more I keep hearing stories from people coming in here who have been having run-ins with this person and the business again, and it makes me laugh. It's ridiculous and sad and annoying, but I can't help but laugh at how ridiculous it is. So we'll see if I have another update next week. I really hope I don't. I hope things calm down and that it's a non-issue anymore, but I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. So on today's episode, I wanted to revisit an episode we did in season 1 called Vintage and Size Inclusivity. And this was an episode that originally I made because it was the number one question I would get in the shop. I have lots of customers coming in who have felt almost dejected by not just vintage shops, but in clothing shops in general because of the lack of inclusivity and sizing. And it's a question that I still get almost every single day. And I feel like that we need to keep this conversation going. And I know me as a business owner, I have to be held accountable. And every day I try to figure out ways I can specifically source more plus size vintage. What prompted me to revisit this episode was not only the ongoing conversation I've had with many of my customers about this in store, but also just different articles I've been reading, and also feedback from people who have listened to that particular episode, which thank you. I love talking about this. Now, an article that I had recently read that just got the motor going in my brain and lots of topics and issues that I want to talk about came from this article from the online publication Racked. Now, this was written in 2018, but I still think it's immensely relevant even 4 years later. And it's by Alexandra Mondelek. And it's called Why It's So Hard to Find Plus Size Vintage. Being over a size 12 isn't new, so why is finding plus size vintage clothing from the past so impossible? Now, one of the biggest takeaways I got from this article that just really stuck with me, and let me pull it up. I had to put a marker in here because I really, really wanted to read this one. So when answering the question, why is plus size vintage shopping so hard? She answered this. A common answer to this question might be that everyone in the 20th century was smaller than people today. Indeed, adult obesity rates in the U.S. grew from mid-century into the 1990s and up until the early 2010s, before plateauing. And there's an aside where there are racial and socioeconomic disparities that disproportionately affect people of color and low-income people, of course. Statistically speaking, the proportion of overweight and obese people is greater today, but those people still existed in the 20th century. Now, that one stuck out to me because that is the number one comment I get from customers coming in when I talk to them about vintage and sizing. And I hear this all the time. People were just smaller back then. Which, that one, again, this is such a complex subject because there's so many factors that go into it. And yes, there were a lot of people that were smaller back in that time period due to a lot of different circumstances. But people existed in all shapes and sizes. Having a curvy plus size figure is not new. It's not new. It's not as if plus size people popped up into existence post 2010. That's not factual. And this has been something that the fashion industry has been trying to create this narrative of that the problem's not us, it's you. You've changed, not us. And it's that shaming atmosphere that pushes a lot of people away from fashion, not just vintage, but modern fashion as well. And this pertains to all genders. If you have a body, you have a body shape. Therefore, you've experienced some sort of problems when you've been trying on clothing. And what this does is it's a horrifically toxic idea to put in people's heads that you are the problem and you have to change because society isn't going to change. And that's just simply not true. But that paragraph really, again, struck me. Now, much like in modern retail and fashion, there is a size bias. I've worked in retail, whether it be corporate or small business, for over 10 years. And in those 10 years, you start to see a trend. And this isn't just exclusive to modern fashion. This happens in vintage shops as well, where that size bias dictates what buyers will purchase for their shop. And what that means is if, let's say, you have a clothing retail shop, and you may notice, wow, this shop only carries a certain range of sizing. And I don't know if any of you have ever experienced this. I know I've experienced this at places I've worked and have shopped at, where you ask if something is in a certain size. And I'm going to just use a size 2X. And you may get a sales associate say, yeah, those just don't sell very well, so we special order them in. We don't have them on our floor because they just don't sell fast. But if people want them on request, we can get them in. And as well-meaning as I'm sure a lot of businesses are for that, that just kind of turns the knife in the wound, where it makes the person buying feel as if there's something wrong with them, that they can't access the same thing as everybody else, which just pushes people away even further. But what this really means, and especially coming from Fargo, North Dakota, we have had many plus size businesses in our area. The problem is, I would always hear, well, we carried a full range of plus size clothing, but no one ever bought it. And we have to step back a bit, because there are two main reasons why I've seen this happen. The first one is access. For so many years, especially with the rise of the internet and online shopping, a lot of women, myself included, we cannot find our size in shops and physical locations where we live. And if we have to special order a size in a shop that we're in, why don't we just go online and buy it? If you're going to be buying it online anyways. And so for so many years, a lot of people have had to buy things online, and you just become so accustomed and used to it, you just stop looking at physical brick and mortar shops. But when the opportunity comes where, let's say you have a specialty small business shop that opens in your town that only carries a size, let's say 12 and up, maybe 12 to 26, 28. I'm just throwing some sizes out there. You hear, well, we had to close because no one would shop here. Now, whether it be social media, lack of advertising, that I'm not sure. But you see the size, not just the sizes, but the styles of some of these clothes that come out. And again, the big problem is they're different. And we've all been there. And I know I said this in the previous episode, where just because you're a plus size doesn't mean you want to wear a caftan. Now, let's say, for example, you go to a clothing shop and you see what's traditionally called straight size, which I'm not going to go off on a tangent about how I feel about sizing, especially today. If you want to hear my rant about it, listen to the first episode. But what I mean by straight size is conventionally it's looked at as a size 0 to 14 or a small to large. But let's face it, we all know a size large today is not a size 14. But okay, I can't go down that rabbit hole. But if you are let's say a traditional 16, 18 dress size, and you see a beautiful empire waist dress in a straight size 6, a medium, what have you. Why can you not have that dress in your size? You think, it's an empire waist dress. All that means is the waistline hits above your natural waist. Now, everybody has a waist. Everybody's waist looks different because no body is the same. Literally, no body is the same. But when it comes to plus size fashion in general, you can't get that dress. You get what I call a bag, where it's just loose. There's no shape to it because God forbid anybody with curves wants to show off their shape. I think we've all been there. If you're plus size, of course you want to hide your shape. No, that's not reality. So why is it you cannot have that particular dress in your size? There shouldn't be a difference. It's a particular cut. It's not rocket science. Now there's a brand, a modern brand, and I know a lot of you out there know, and it's called Selkie. And you've probably seen them on social media. They have these beautiful ethereal, I call them poof dresses, but they have an empire waist that hits above your natural waistline, just like right under your bust. A really 70s type silhouette. But they're very short, poofy, kind of baby doll dresses. And they are very size inclusive. They have a full inclusive size range. But a lot of their dresses have that empire waist. Now, why is it that this company can make sizes for an extra small all the way up to a 4 or 5X in the exact same cut and style? The dresses look identical. They're just different sizes. The secret is you listen to what people want. Now, if you have a larger chest, you will obviously need more room in that bust to accommodate. So what do places like Selkie do? They accommodate. They realize that a person who maybe fits a size medium in their dresses is probably not going to have the same bust size as someone who is a 3X or 4X. And then even with chest sizes, it has nothing necessarily to do with cup size all the time. It's just the measurement around, so they accommodate for that. Now again, no sizing is perfect. Of course, not everything's going to fit you perfectly. But they have been a modern retailer that I have seen take styles of clothing and translate them to all sizes without compromising their design. Because guess what? It is possible. Where that gets hairy in the vintage field is when you look back to my favorite periods are the 50s and 60s. Those are the ones I know the most about. I can't speak as much to the 20s, 30s, and 40s. But what I really appreciated about the 50s and 60s was this was before the age of mass production. You got things tailored. A lot of people knew how to make their own clothing. Custom made, tailoring, altering. It was a whole different world. Fabrics were more sustainable, natural fibers. Just everything was different. And this is where a lot of pieces, for whatever reason, seem to be so scarce. Because they were individually made. There are dresses I have in my collection where if they're handmade, of course you're not going to see that all around the country. There's only one. And even if you buy a vintage 1960s JCPenney's dress or blouse, things weren't mass produced then like they are now. It was a completely different industry back then. Go back to the fabric. Now, we all know with polyester can survive a fire. Like, that is like Teflon. It's indestructible. But in the 50s and 60s, they used a lot of linen, a lot of cotton. My favorite, elastane. I always pronounce that wrong. Elastane. It's spandex. It's spandex, which does have a little bit of a polyester blend. So when you use natural fabrics like cotton and linen, with proper care, they can last a really long time. But as with a lot of natural fibers, without proper care, sometimes they can break down. Material nowadays, again, it's almost the wild, wild west. You get fabrics that are really great. And again, spandex. I love spandex. But you also get fabrics that are purposely made to destruct, because that is our consumer culture. Because if I make and provide a garment that is going to last for 50, 60 years, you may not ever buy from me again. I can't have that. I need you to keep buying from me. So I'm going to produce a product that will self-destruct after 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wears. Or if you wash it once, all of a sudden a bunch of holes will appear. That is kind of what our consumer culture has become. And you see a lot of small businesses, small makers, designers pushing back against that. But this is a culture that we're so used to now. And don't get me wrong. When clothing's mass produced, especially plus size clothing, you get more access to it. Which is why a lot of vintage shops, mine included, when we do get plus size pieces in, a lot of times they're from the 80s and 90s. Because you had way more access and you had more distribution. But with that, it's kind of a catch-22. Because I think all of us, we want that rare one-of-a-kind item from the 50s and 60s that fits us like a glove, something that nobody else has. But we also want to be able to get vintage clothing that fits us. And so you have an interesting catch there. So what do you do about it? Now, while we can't go back and rewrite fashion history, what we can do, and especially what I can provide you, are tips on how to make vintage work for you and how to find it. Now, it's not an easy how to, because let's face it, finding more inclusive sizes in vintage is almost an art form because of all the practice a lot of us have had to do. But my biggest tip to you, if you are traveling, if you're someone who loves to travel, you find yourself in a different city all the time, you have wanderlust, whenever you're in bigger cities, hit up all the vintage stores. And I will say this time and time again, it's all about location, location, location. Now, being here in the Midwest, and I've said it before, we're in farm country. A lot of people who lived in the state, they're farmers. They were working people. If they had any nice clothing, they maybe only had 1 or 2, 3 pieces at the most, because they didn't have an opportunity to wear it. The clothes that they did have, that they wore regularly, were worn to the bone and probably ended up being thrown away. However, if you go to bigger cities like Los Angeles, Minneapolis, New York City, because of how many people lived and worked there, and you had way more diverse professions, your likelihood of finding more size-inclusive pieces rises exponentially. Doesn't mean it's easy and that you're going to see tons of inclusive sizing in vintage shops, but you're going to see more of it than if you were to go to a vintage shop in a random small city in, let's say, Oklahoma. It's all about opportunity and location. And again, bring a measuring tape, know your measurements, because a lot of vintage shops as well will add measurements onto all of their garment tags and their price tags. Or measure pieces when you go in. That's one of the biggest things. When I know I'm going to a bigger city, I know the likelihood of me finding something that's going to fit me is going to be a little bit better. And again, you may get pieces that are mainly from the 80s and early 90s, and I get it, you guys, it's frustrating. But it does not mean those pieces don't exist and didn't exist in earlier decades. It's not a needle in a haystack necessarily. But again, these are pieces that when people snap them up, a lot of times they never go back on the market. And I mean, I can use myself and other friends of mine who are collectors, that when you get pieces that are way more inclusive, you hold on to those for dear life. But that's one big tip. And to kind of put a little bit more context into that, because I know I've been asked, why is it the 80s and 90s have more sizes? But then you see that start to taper off in the late 90s and 2000s. And the correlation, it's a mix. In the 80s, different silhouettes were introduced. Looser silhouettes, you know, you have the triangle and the more boxy shapes. And what that means is it can fit different body types. Now, if you have a shift dress from the 80s, and let's say it's marked a size 8, but it's an exaggerated cut, that means it can be a shift dress probably for the intended size. But if I wanted to wear it and I thought, well, hey, I thought this would make a really cool kind of bodycon mini dress or tunic, at least it provides you a little option. But in the 90s, and especially the early 90s, you had the onset of the supermodels like Kate Moss. And you've probably heard that term, the heroin chic look. Now that body type and that figure became really synonymous with the early to mid 90s. And that also coincided with the big turnaround in fast fashion and mass production. So of course, retailers are going to look at that small segment of people and say, well, you see Kate Moss on every magazine. Everybody wants to be her. So we're going to create clothing for a Kate Moss. And if they want to wear our clothing, they'll have to find a way to fit in it. So you see towards the late 90s and the early 2000s, you get very small pieces. And I was even looking through some late 90s, early 2000 pieces from Delia's. If any of you remember those catalogs growing up in the 90s. And a lot of the sizes, you guys, they are rough. I mean, they're tiny. Today, they would probably fit someone who is maybe a dress size 2 or 3. They're very small. And especially with Delia's clothing from the late 90s, it's very hard to find inclusive sizing in that. Because that wasn't the audience that was popular at the time. And without social media, no one could say anything otherwise. So that's where you notice a little bit of a shift. And is it discouraging? Hell yes, it is. But as we've seen in the fashion industry, it ebbs and flows. Everything changes. And it does cause a ripple effect. But what helps is making vintage work for you. Just because you find a vintage piece that is supposed to be a dress or it's supposed to be a long cardigan, if it fits you, but if it's a little bit shorter, it's more cropped than an actual long cardigan, if it fits you, it freaking fits you. Style it. Style it differently. Who cares? Make it into something that works for you. If it's a 1950s baby doll dress and it fits you, but it's way too short, make it a cool tunic top. You have that freedom. It's an inanimate object. It's a garment. It's fabric. You can do something with it. You're not boxed in by what a particular garment is supposed to be. But if you want someone who I think exemplifies how I see plus size vintage, and how if you make the right connections and you know where to go, you can find amazing pieces, look up, her name is Dottie DeVille on Instagram. And some of the pieces she wears, oh my gosh, you guys. She gave me hope that I could find pieces just like hers. She wears a lot of these beautiful Jean Shelley 1960s beaded gowns. They're knit, so they hug the body perfectly, intricate beading. They're designer gowns. And she finds them in her size, and they look amazing. So it can be done. It can be done. You just have to know where to look, who to talk to, knowing the right people, know your measurements, and go online. If you can't make it to LA or any of these bigger cities, go online. I know it's not the easiest remedy, but aren't we all used to having to be resourceful and kind of just do it ourselves? I know it's exhausting, but it is possible. Now, this is a conversation that I will probably be doing lots more episodes on. Since the last episode I did on this in season 1, I've had really great conversations with people who have reached out after listening to it and have had more questions. And let's face it, we do what we can to compensate for the fact that the fashion industry is not inclusive. There are brands, vintage shops that are really trying, and we'll get there. I really do firmly believe that we'll get there. And that's, why in my shop, I carry vintage inspired lines, because if I can't physically carry inclusive vintage at all times, then I'm going to be carrying something equally as amazing that is inclusive. We'll get there. We'll get there. But I thank you guys again for listening. And if you like episodes like this, let me know. I love talking about it. I love talking about topics that those who come in here ask about every day. It's what I have fun doing. I love connecting with everybody and continuing this conversation going. But next week we are going to take a little bit of a break. It's been a real trip lately, and I'll update you guys on that in the next episode. But again, next week we are taking a little break, but then we'll be back with new episodes in March. Thank you so much for listening, you guys. Have a great week.